I think the reason a lot of people voted for Trump is because they were like, what the hell? There's nothing to lose, right? Even if he installs a dictatorship, so what? There are plenty of good dictatorships. So maybe we'll be lucky enough to become one of those. Yeah, I think that's really an illusion. I really want to make people to stop fantasizing the benevolent dictator. They don't exist.
This is Rhyming Chaos, where we interview people who've lived through or studied times of great upheaval, tyranny, or authoritarian takeover. We hope these interviews can help us understand what is happening in the United States right now and how decent people can fight against it. Today, my guest is Huey Lee. He's from Beijing, China, originally, and came to the US to study. He's the author of Dividing the Rulers, How Majority Cycling Saves Democracy, and he has a PhD in political science from University of California, Davis. I first became aware of him because he's a huge star on TikTok and YouTube, where he's done comedy, but now frequently discusses American, Chinese, and global politics in monologue videos, often debunking some of the misguided ideas that trend on TikTok. Welcome to Rhyming Chaos, Huey.
Well, I definitely wouldn't say a big star, especially since you will probably find I'm not as elaborate as I appear to be because most of my videos were scripted. I knew exactly what I was gonna say.
Well, a big star, I mean, these things are relative. So, I think you have millions. Your likes are in the millions. So for some of us, that seems big. Yeah. But let's talk about your book first. Can you explain what is the concept of majority cycling?
It's actually pretty simple. Basically, it means, when there's a majority. In the past, people used to worry about the tyranny of the majority, but empirically, it didn't happen all that often. So partly it was because the majority is never like a fixed thing, right? So the majority is of different groups, and these different groups, they keep realigning all the time. It's not just happen during elections, but they keep realigning real time, at any moment, especially in countries with coalition governments, right? I suppose you know what coalition governments are. Right, so it's like
not like America, where you have different parties who have to come together to rule.
Yeah, it's like in parliamentary systems, some governments are consisted of different parties, right? So in that case, it's the so-called majority is really not one entity, right? It's made of different entities, and these different entities, they can realign themselves with the minority, or in other words, the winners can break apart at any moment and realign themselves with the losers, right? Part of the winners can break apart and realign with the losers. So that process basically makes sure that there's, in real democracy, there's really never a stable majority. That process is called cycling, right? Because you can never really predict what will happen in the next election cycle. You can never really predict what will be the voting outcome.
And so when you look at the United States right now, how would you see it? Because also there isn't obviously a coalition government here.
In the past, the political parties in the US were famous for not having strong party discipline, right? So there was a lot of cross-voting, right? The members in one party can vote with the majority of the other party all the time. But these things no longer happen that often, especially under Trump. Basically, every bill is voted on across, not a cross-party line, but every bill is on the party line, right? So yeah, you either vote with this party or you vote with that party. So there's really no much cycling going on. You can exactly predict the outcome, right? Right now, basically, there's no way for the Democrats to get any of their bills passed.
Do you think this is a failure of the current American system itself that makes it much easier to have a kind of tyranny of the majority? Or do you think particular things have gone wrong in this country, like Citizens United, or factors that you could blame for this situation?
I'd say both. I mean, a two-party system like this, eventually, some scholars believe that eventually, sorry, I am not in academia anymore, so I can't cite specific names out of the top of my head, but some scholars believe that this sorting process will happen eventually. By sorting, it means voters will sort into two parties more accurately. So two parties will become more and more different, right? Even though they both fight for median voters, but in the long run, also become more and more different because voters realize which party they really belong to. So the two parties become more and more distinct. So that process is called polarization, right? Especially, at some point, Trump's strategy was not to court median voters, right? His strategy was to find a new turnout, to find people who used to not vote, like Nazis, people who used to be outside the politics, right?
Anti-vaxxers.
Yeah, to get them, yeah, so basically get them into the electorate. So that further makes two parties more and more different. In a way, it's kind of, I would say, a necessary outcome of the two-party system, right? But of course, there are also some accidental reasons. As you said, Citizen United and maybe also some other too many billionaires or maybe just Trump personally. The personal characteristic of Trump also, contributed a lot. If he didn't exist, so it's really hard to say.
So you interact with, I know you're modestly saying you're not a big star, but you do interact with thousands, I think possibly hundreds of thousands of people on TikTok, YouTube, and Substack.
Mm-hmm.
And your videos have been liked millions of times. And I think probably a majority, or at least a lot of your fans, are American. And many of your videos are you correcting views that you have encountered that you think are misguided, sometimes about China. Like some of the links you sent me were sort of idealistic Americans looking at China. But when it comes to the United States and China, what do you think the most misguided ideas that you encounter are on TikTok and elsewhere on the internet?
The most misguided idea, that's a little hard to say, but I would say, I think people are definitely overestimating the effectiveness of the Chinese political system. By the way, I just want to say, one of the reasons that most of my audience are Americans is that I basically stopped speaking Chinese. And the reason I stopped making Chinese content is because I was afraid, right? Because if I make too many Chinese content, I'll get on the radar of the CCPs. And that I don't want to get on their radar. So that partly already, the fact that I gave up my native language already sort of, suggest, how much fear I had, growing up. But even if you don't look at my personal experience, just data-wise, I think it's still pretty easy to tell, like, China is not nearly as promising as a lot of people imagine. Because, I would say the most misguided idea about China is how effective the government is. Because I think one of the most important features of the Chinese economy is the regional disparity. And that disparity is not the same as the disparity in America, right? Because in America, of course, there's huge regional disparity. But the thing is, people can move from states to states relatively freely, right? If you really can't stand your home state, okay, you can just, pack and leave. But in China, the problem is a lot of people can't really leave, especially this public school system is based on something called 户口. I don't know if you heard of that term. It's like a residence permit, but it's not just, it's really hard to change.
Your social services are tied into the location of your residence permit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think the most important variable is public school enrollment, right? Because these kids, these rural kids, they are born in big cities, but they're still rural kids because they don't have the urban 户口. Right. So say if your parents are doing some delivery job or some janitor job in Shanghai and you were born in Shanghai, but you are still considered a rural kid and you can't really go to public school in Shanghai. So what happens is that a lot of poor people have to send their kids back home to their hometown while they work in the big cities to earn a living. So this kind of people, like the amount of this kind of people is huge. It's not like just a footnote of the economy. These are, if not the majority, these are a huge minority of the population. I think there are at least 50 million so-called left behind children. So children who can't live with both of their parents, left behind children. But those people, you can't really observe them. Let's say if a Westerner goes to China, he can't really observe these people because you don't see them in your circles, right? So they live in their dorms, and the kids live back in the countryside and in extremely poor living conditions and go to schools that hardly has any resources. And their parents normally live in these very crowded dorms for workers, for factory workers, or for restaurant workers, and they don't interact with foreign visitors.
Do you think that's changing? I mean, there doesn't seem to be any possibility that they're going to change the hukou, the residence permit system. But what does seem to be happening is that third tier and fourth tier cities in China are getting to be nicer places, places that have pleasant riverside walks and where the quality of the schooling is actually going up. So, I mean, don't you think there might be another approach to develop?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so mathematically, I mean, if the growth rate keeps up, eventually 水涨船高, I've never heard of it. When water is going up, all the boats are going up. So it's like a Chinese saying, right? So if you can keep up the growth rate, I mean, eventually, of course, even the poorest area will somehow benefit, right? So, of course, that's mathematically guaranteed. But the thing is, can you always keep that kind of growth rate? At least based on other countries' experience, I don't think any country can keep growing like that forever, right? There are a lot of hard constraints, population, and there's the labor capital ratio, right? So when you are labor intensive, it's by having a little capital can generate a lot of GDP. But when you are already sort of capital intensive, you don't have as much labor, then the potential for growth will be very limited, right? So
No, so what about the United States' problems? Because you also do talk about them. And I mean, you earlier were talking about polarization. And earlier today, I did a search on Twitter for Charlie Kirk. And then I did one on Blue Sky. And I just got the top results in both. And it was like two different worlds. The Twitter results were people talking about how evil the left wing is and saying all kinds of things about liberals and left wingers. And in Blue Sky, everybody was criticizing Charlie Kirk, and people have written these very sort of anodyne, or not anodyne, like these obituaries about him that actually praise him. People in the New York Times, Ezra Klein, that kind of thing. I mean, it's like two different worlds. And I certainly am waking up every morning at the moment dreading to turn on the news, because the feeling is, what is it going to be today? Is there going to be that bombed up boat of unknown people off Venezuelan coast, or they've declared tariffs of like 500% on some tiny country in Africa, or they've rounded up a bunch of immigrants, using masked men. Every day seems to be an assault on decency. So, I mean, that can't sit too well with you, can it?
Yeah, I think that's definitely scary. I think one potential solution I can think of is, because based on other countries' experience, normally when you have more parties, because polarization, by definition, you need two poles, right? So when you have multiple parties, normally it should be better because the conflict or the disagreement within each party will be more expressed. Like right now, people in America, mostly they forget about their internal disagreements, especially the Republicans. Of course, they still disagree with among themselves. But that disagreement is not visible, right? Because the focal point is only the left versus right. And all their attention is attracted to their conflict with the left. So the party system sort of reinforced the polarization in the electorate. Of course, the electorate also reinforced the party system, and it's becomes sort of a vicious circle, right? So if one day, it's a big if, and it's a long shot, but if one day America can adopt somewhat different systems and allow different parties to emerge, maybe things can get a little better. But right now, I just don't see a lot of hope.
What are your feelings about TikTok's Chinese ownership? Do you think the Chinese government puts its fingers on the scales when it comes to content and sort of forces TikTok to downplay videos about horrible things in China and make more popular those videos of young Westerners in Chongqing and Shanghai being amazed by the city, or high-speed trains or electric cars?
Well, of course. I mean, why not? Like, why not do it? There's no incentive for them to hold back, right? So they're so fluent in manipulating algorithm. And I personally, I mean, I don't know if they did anything to my view counts, but sometimes I remember there was a video when I talk about Mao and they removed the sound and didn't really give me a lot of explanation, because definitely there was no hate speech or anything in that video. So, I mean, maybe if I appeal, maybe they will remove that. But I mean, it's just, I can't imagine that they don't do anything about algorithm. That would be dumb, right? Because they have the power, so why not do it? And other Chinese platforms are even more blatant than TikTok, right? So Weibo, I don't know if you use Weibo.
Not anymore. They went after the big V in 2012, 13, and they really started censoring it. I stopped using it.
Yeah, right now it's not just censored. Right now they no longer allow foreign, overseas users to register new accounts. So it basically become unusable, right? But back then, even when they allowed, I kept losing my accounts, right? I lost dozens of them.
Sure, but TikTok is for the outside world, right? Whereas Weibo is intended for the Chinese market.
Yeah. So because, Chinese residents can't really access to TikTok, so maybe they're less concerned about the content. But still, more or less, they'll do something, right? Because why not? There's no accountability or there's no consequence for doing some censorship, so why not? Yeah.
What do you think about the US flip-flopping on whether to allow TikTok to operate or to ban it? Or now, this week they're talking about a deal that will be announced on Friday where Beijing will somehow give up ownership to some Trump cronies.
Well, firstly, I don't really have the ability to assess whether TikTok is a threat because, America right now has too many threats. TikTok is just,
pretty low on the list.
Yeah. So I don't really know if it's necessary to ban it. I don't know the pros and cons really. There's no way for me to assess it. But also politically, it's just too hard, right? So if you close off that TikTok, it's a political suicide, right? So yeah, Joe Biden didn't do it until after the election, and then Trump is extremely. I would say he's pretty sensitive about ratings. I don't think if he just close it down overnight, I just can't imagine why he would do that.
Right, he would lose a lot of young voters.
Yeah. But whether he should do that, I don't know. I don't have the data to evaluate it.
You have a video, I don't know, maybe it's the one that you mentioned about Mao Zedong, the one being silenced. You have a video where you talk about dictators and how you think many of your viewers sort of underestimate what kind of a person a dictator is. And you base it off your experience in China and what you know of China's history with Mao Zedong. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm just thinking because when a person is able to get to that position, you can't get to that position without certain psychological traits, right? Guy like you and me, we will never be able to get to that kind of position, even if we want to, even if we double our IQ. That process requires some brutality. It's not like everyone can do it, right? Trump is like that too, right? He can get rich mostly because he has this psychological tolerance to brutality. He can refuse to pay people or things like that. It's not something like everyone can do. So yeah, especially for dictators, if you can manage to accumulate so much power or even monopolize power, it's not something like people think, oh, because he's a leader of the country, so he must care about the country. And that assumption is just baseless because why would he, right? He already had so much blood in his hands. Why would he all of a sudden become a benevolent person? It doesn't make sense. And of course, after they become dictator, things will get even worse because they face a echo chamber, right? So nobody in their circle dares to say anything against them. That will just make them more and more spoiled. You see Trump's cabinet meetings, right? So it's hard to imagine that he becomes nicer in that environment over time because everyone is saying he's doing the right thing, right? Everyone around him is saying he's doing the right thing. Of course, Trump is not technically he's not a pure dictator because he still has to face the social media. He still has to face the criticism from the grassroots, right? But for a lot of pure dictators, Stalin or whatever, they never heard any criticism, not their whole life. At least after they secure the power, they will never hear any criticism at all.
But I think Trump is increasingly like that. I mean, I don't know if you saw that clip of an Australian journalist, I think it was yesterday, asking him about his business dealings. And he was like, you're a very nice little man, and I'm going to tell the leader of your country.
Yeah.
And I think he is insulating himself as much as possible. And I mean, even foreign leaders, like today, the day we're recording is September 17th, he's in England and he's being feted with this enormous parade at Windsor Castle by the King and Queen and Prime Minister.
Yeah. People do fear him. Yeah, people do fear him, not just his circle, but also foreigners, foreign leaders, and journalists. You can tell they do fear him a lot. And a lot of journalists are definitely holding back. They could ask some follow-up questions, but they are afraid, they may get kicked out of the White House pool. So they just stop asking. So yeah, that fear is definitely growing. And when it reached to a certain point, then basically Trump will no longer hear any criticism.
Has it surprised you how fast it's been, how quickly that has happened? Because I have to tell you, I mean, I never thought Trump was anything good for the country, but I had not predicted how quickly things would change here, like how quickly certain people would start self-censoring in a way that reminds me of China, and how many norms would be broken, how quickly.
Yeah, that's something I think a lot of people don't understand, is that because a lot of Americans, they were brainwashed by this idea of separation of power. They always believe, we have this separation of power, we have different branches. But if you really study the comparative examples of different countries, you'll see that it's really hard to constrain a president, because the president has something called personnel power. He can fire hundreds or even thousands of people. And that power belongs to himself, belongs to no other person in the country, right? So he controls thousands of power holders' job security. And that alone is really hard to constrain, because, all these people fear losing their jobs. And he can use that to sort of extort concessions and force people to do things for him. And of course, he can also use the law enforcement to tilt cases to his favor. And of course, the legislators will also ask him for favor, because he has so much power. That means when you have more power, you have more attention, right? So he enjoys more power, so he enjoys more attention. And because he enjoys more attention, all these legislators have to suck up to him in order to get more media coverage, in order to get his endorsement, things like that.
My sense is that in the first Trump presidency, the people around him, most of them were sort of professional government people, whereas the people that gathered very close to him for his second presidency are all grifters. They're all people who either want power or money and are extremely driven to gain as much power and money as possible. And they understand what the rules of the game are with him. So those people are not going to go against his wills at all, are they?
Yeah, no, they won't. I think this is by design, right? The first term, Trump wants to learn the trade, and he hired some professionals, he hired some technocrats, and sort of get things on track. And then once he learned the trade, he started to kick those people out. Almost none of the current cabinet members is from the last cabinet. Maybe only one or two is from the last cabinet, right? They are all new people, and they're all mostly unexperienced people who has like unquestioned loyalty. Like they'll do anything for him, right? So it's not new, right? The Cultural Revolution was sort of like that, right? So the Chinese Communist Party used to have a lot of technocrats, but then Mao felt like he couldn't do whatever he wanted, so he basically. The point of the Cultural Revolution was to remove the technocrats. That's the real motivation, right? The other things are just side effects. The executions and everything, those are just side effects, like the people fight each other. Those are just side effects. The fundamental motivation was to remove the technocrats, right? So he can do whatever he wants. He can accumulate all the loyalists around him, right? So that's what Trump is doing.
Right. Under Mao, it was better read than expert, and under Trump, it's better red hat than expert, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a really good analogy. Yeah.
So, Huey, I mean, what do you think like Americans should do if they value democracy and freedom? What do ordinary people do in the face of this incredible political machine that is kind of running over everything?
Yeah, I mean, of course, at this point, I think voting still matters, right? So he will definitely try a lot of ways to sort of suppress voting and gerrymandering, things like that. But voting still matters, right? At least in 2026, I'm not sure it would still matter if the Republicans win the 2026 midterm election, right? But at least before that, I think it still matters, right? Because at least if the Democrats has one of the chambers, one of the either House or the Senate, at least it will be harder for Trump to declare emergency or even change the Constitution or things like that. I think that still matters, right? But after that, if they won both House and the Senate, I don't know. I really don't know what to do. Maybe, I don't know, just passive sort of withdrawal cooperation. I don't know, things like that, boycott. But really, if they win again, it's really hard to do anything because now they have full legitimacy. They're like, look, we have the support, right? Maybe that support is fake, but how do you prove it's fake? So yeah, like Putin said, I have 87% of the votes or something like that. Like, of course he doesn't, but how do you prove it, right? So yeah, when he reached that level, it will be very difficult. Maybe he will probably just find an excuse to declare emergency and get a third term, or maybe start a war or something and say, look, we are in this urgent situation, so we can't change the president. Right? So, and of course, I'm sure all the Republican legislators will go along because they're all afraid of him. Right? So maybe there will be 2 or 3 objecting to that, but I don't think it would matter that much. But of course, there's also a physical limit of how long he can live, right? So that's one thing that still makes me a little bit hopeful. Yeah, but of course, some people say J.D. Vance would be worse, or yeah, it's possible. But at least I don't think JD is that charismatic. I don't think he can command that much popularity. So I don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty. But personally, if they win the midterm election, I would be very pessimistic.
Well, that didn't cheer me up, but maybe what can is I'll ask you a professional question. What are you planning to do? Because you've had some success on TikTok and you use YouTube, and I think pretty much everything you do is now also on Substack. Are you planning to just carry on doing videos, or have you got anything new in mind? And which platforms do you think you might use the most?
Not really. I mean, I do some private teaching and do some other things, writing. But yeah, I don't really know where I can find another breakthrough. To try to spread message and maybe get on more of these podcasts. I don't know. So yeah, I don't know. Of course, I would hope that more people can see my message, but it's something you can't really control. Yeah, especially most of the algorithms are not friendly to liberal voices.
Or thoughtful voices, perhaps. The algorithms like outrage. Let me just add one last question.
Mhm.
What do you think your message is? Let me tell you what I think it is. I think you encourage people to think carefully about their political beliefs and to try and sort of analyze them in a rational way. Is that about right? Or how would you define your message?
Well, I think personally, my key motivation is to encourage people to maintain a sort of largely democratic process you know, because people who never experienced dictatorship, they can't imagine how bad it's going to be. They can't imagine how suffocating it's going to be, right? All they see is, all these clean streets in China, or maybe some people say Singapore or something. But they don't really know, like, I mean, Singapore is not exactly like authoritarian, but I feel like some people, when they look at other authoritarian systems, they only see the good side. Personally, the most important job I give myself is to remind people that you don't want to lose this imperfect democracy, even though this democracy is really frustrating in many ways, right? Inequality and, gun violence. It's really easy to see the bad things, that's happening. But the thing is, if you don't even preserve this, yeah, I think my key message is that you still have a lot to lose. Right? A lot of people think I have nothing to lose because we're already at the rock bottom. There's nothing to lose. But I really want people to know that you still have a lot to lose, right? You can always go down. There's still North Korea, right? There's still, I don't know.
It doesn't even have to go that extreme.
Yeah.
I grew up in apartheid era South Africa, and then I lived most of my adult life in China. And I mean, China was at some of its most sort of optimistic and booming times in recent years, mostly when I was there. So it was very nice. But I also saw some pretty horrible things that Americans had no idea about, the average American. So I think that is a valuable message.
Yeah, I think the reason a lot of people voted for Trump is because they were like, what the hell? There's nothing to lose, right? Even if he installs a dictatorship, so what? There are plenty of good dictatorships. So maybe we'll be lucky enough to become one of those. Yeah, I think that's really an illusion. I really want to make people to stop fantasizing the benevolent dictator. They don't exist.
A benevolent dictator, or even just, I think my sense is a lot of people here are complacent because things have never gone really seriously wrong politically for young people in living memory.
Yeah, there was never really a war on American soil, and there's really never a large crackdown. Even after September 11, like there wasn't really a actual crackdown. There was some, civil rights violations, but there was not like something like really seriously affecting people's lives, right? You don't have to fear like you're getting dragged into some camp and something like that. So that's something that still can happen in the future. I just hope people know that. Yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, Huey Lee.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
The Rhyming Chaos podcast is produced by me, Jeremy Goldkorn. The show is edited by Carter Scripps. The theme music is Paperboy, composed and performed on the Guzheng by Wu Fei. Our closing music is Eric Satie's Jinlo Pedi No. 1, arranged and performed by Wu Fei. Our cover art is by Li Yunfei. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what we're doing, please take out a paid subscription at rhymingchaos.com. And you can find Huey Lee all over the internet. I'll post links to his YouTube, TikTok, and Substack accounts. Thank you so much, Huey.
Yeah, thank you guys for listening.